Many of you have been asking about the build that I used to solo the World Tier 4 World Boss in about a minute and 20 seconds, and I'm here to showcase that for you all. Now, this is, in my opinion, the best build to follow approaching the end game. It's not necessarily the best end game build, but it is very, very minimal requirements, and as you approach, you can transition your leveling Twisting Blades build into this, so you have a really easy transition, because most of the aspects that I was using in this clip are actually from dungeons, which makes it super, super nice. Now, I will be streaming the launch of Diablo, and I will be going ahead and doing a Q&A beforehand, actually on Twitch this time, so I'll leave a link to it down below. And as of launching this video, will be about 3 hours at 4 p.m. Mountain Standard Time or 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time if you guys want to check that out. So I also have Twitch drops and all that stuff for when that time comes. But with that said, let's dive into the build. So while going through this build, I would like to suggest a couple of skill modifications and things you can do depending on your playstyle. But also at the very beginning here, I'll just let you know a lot of these aspects here can be found in the Codex of Power, like the Aspect of Might, Disobedience, Blade Dancers here, the Corruption, Edge Master aspect. All these are all Codex of Power, and if you get these ones, you'll have basically the majority of this build ready to go. With that said, let's dive into the skills here and kind of figure out how this build works. The first thing that I recommend for every build is to get a guaranteed source of vulnerable. Now, you can get it with your Paragon and your glyphs, which means that you can swap out the basic here, but at least for the level 1 to 50 process guaranteed, and then even onwards, and for bosses, you're gonna have a guaranteed source of vulnerable with fundamental puncture. This allows you to get that vulnerable damage out, and for those of you that don't know, vulnerable damage is a separate damage multiplier than any other damage in the game, which is super, super powerful, okay? If you have enough vulnerable in whatever aspects you're running, or potentially Paragon, then you might want to swap over to Blade Shift and run into Primary Blade Shift for the extra non-physical resistances, which can be very, very powerful. But Puncture and Fundamental Puncture are going to be the ways to go. Also, by the way, I have a full list of the point-by-point breakdown of the skill tree in a spreadsheet down below if you guys want to check that out. For our core skill, we're going to be running Twisting Blades and Advanced Twisting Blades. Now, I personally prefer Advanced Twisting Blades almost always, and the reason for this is you want to be able to move quickly through even the endgame farming areas, but also just in general in the game. It really just speeds up everything, and being able to reset things like Poison Imbuement, things like Shadow Step, etc. is going to be really, really powerful, okay? Then we have down here Shadow Step as our core movement ability. Now, a lot of people ask me, why do I use Shadow Step over Dash? And that is because you have Unstoppable on Shadow Step, which means it's a CC break. Now, Dash is going to give you that little bit of more mobility, and you also don't need a target for it. But Shadow Step breaks CC. That is incredibly important for me, and anytime you might be fighting spiders, or you might be fighting any sort of thing that might just randomly CC or teleport on you, you can break it with this Shadow Step, which is going to be extremely, extremely useful in just so many areas of the game. But also, you can actually Shadow Step against bosses and increase your crit strike chance, which is very, very nice with enhanced Shadow Step. Then down here, we're going to be picking up Dark Shroud. Now, earlier on into the game, you can run things like Concealment or even Smoke Grenade can be good, but Dark Shroud's going to be so, so critical, especially for boss fights, to increase your damage reduction significantly later on. And also, depending on what you want to go for, if you have at least 4 active, you can get additional crit strike chance, which is really good against bosses, but Subverting Dark Shroud tends to be better for later game dungeons, because you most often will not have 4 to 5 shadows active at all times. Poison Imbuement, this is kind of one of our main damaging abilities, and this applies, people are asking, on every point of the Twisting Blades. So your stab, it applies Poison Imbuement, your pullback also implies Poison Imbuement, and the spin around you when you have Blade Dancer's aspect also applies Poison Imbuement, which makes a lot of the traits here extremely useful. This is a massive damage dealer and something that we really want to work with. Lastly, we have Shadow Clone, but what you can do, which I find quite interesting, is you can actually swap out Shadow Clone for a few other options. First off, your one option would be Dash, right? So you can run with a little bit more mobility. Shadow Clone's going to be more single target damage, but this is going to get you through those later game dungeons a lot quicker and a lot more mobile. You can also potentially keep Shadow Clone and swap out Shadow Step for Poison Trap for additional single turret damage, or you can even swap out Shadow Clone for Poison Trap. Poison Trap's very, very good. It's got a little bit of CC in it, but also down here, you get 10% increased poison damage, which is going to work with your poison imbuement, which is really, really powerful. So I like that, but Shadow Clone tends to be the one I go for in conjunction with Aftermath, restoring energy. And a few of our traits here, we have these ones, which are going to reduce poisoned damage, or damage that poison enemies are going to deal to us. We're going to get extra poisoning damage, extra attack speed for enemy targets that are poisoned. Precision imbuement's going to increase our crit strike chance on imbued skills. Exploit, weapon mastery, and malice all increase our damage. This one's to vulnerable, this one's to healthy and injured enemies, and this one is to based on what weapon we're using. I highly recommend you find some swords because you're going to get consistent value out of it. You will get extra attack speed with daggers, but what I've found is that swords end up being a little bit better, especially with something like Inner Sight available to you. Lastly, Sturdy is going to be close damage reduction. Very, very powerful. There is one combination that I think is really, really solid if you wish to swap away from the advanced twisting blades and go with improved twisting blades. Because what you can do is you can actually go ahead and, let me just pull some points out of this just to show you. You can actually go concussive into trick attacks. And this is super, super nice. So you can see here, when you critically strike a dazed enemy, they are knocked down. And then you can max this out for 15% increased crit strike after knocking down an enemy. That's really powerful with improved twisting blades, because we're always going to be dazing enemies while they're impaled with twisting blades, so that we can impale them and then we can immediately go ahead and crit them and then knock them down, which is going to give us 15% extra crit strike, which, guess what, that's going to amplify our trick attacks, and it's kind of working in a very, very synergistic aspect. I do like this, but I prefer advanced twisting blades for most of the speed running type content. Again, full breakdown down below. One last thing that I want to go over is the key passive is momentum. You can run things like potentially close quarters combat. That's one other ones that I do prefer. You could also run Victimize in a lot of AoE scenarios, although I like this one a lot less. But keep in mind that each trigger of Twisting Blades does proc Lucky Hit. So for example, if you're getting vulnerable out there, you have 3 chances to hit with the Twisting Blades. And guess what? Each hit is a 33% chance. So you basically always get a trigger of Victimize when you go ahead and use one Twisting Blades, but it has a 30% chance even if you do hit the Lucky Hit, which is kind of tricky. But Momentum, I prefer this because you are going to be oftentimes hitting enemies from behind if you are smart about it with Shadow Step. So with 3 stacks, guess what? You get 20% damage reduction, 15% movement speed, 30% energy regeneration. I much, much, much prefer that damage reduction and energy regeneration overall. The movement speed is a nice bonus as well. With that said, let's dive into some of the gear. So as I mentioned before, you do not need all the uniques, you don't need all the unique aspects, but I want to go over kind of the combination that we're running today. So first off, let's start off with the weapons. Starting off with our ranged weapon. Now I do have Blade Dancer's aspect on the ranged weapon. However, depending on what you drop, Edge Masters can be a little bit better. So a lot of you are asking, hey, why do you have Edge Masters on your double weapon? That is because I actually dropped a better Edge Masters with, I believe it was 15% of the range, because the Codex of Power ones always roll the lowest possible. So if you get a better one, you can swap that for Edge Masters, and I'll kind of explain why that's good in the Specialization tab. But this one is going to be your most important one almost always. If you're going to be running Twisting Blades, it's going to give you just extra damage. When they return, you're going to get a little bit of AoE hit, which is super, super powerful, okay? After that, the Edge Master aspect, the reason why this is super good is because of Inner Sight, which we'll go over later, and when I use it, you're going to get extra damage based on your available primary resource. So when you have Inner Sight, you have full primary resource, which means you get full increased damage. Condemnation, this is a unique that I ended up using. You can see core skills deal increased damage when spending 3 combo points, and skills using this weapon have a 30% chance to generate 3 combo points, which is really, really nice, okay? And keep in mind that the basic attacks are still skills in consideration of Condemnation. So you're going to potentially go ahead and get that 3 combo points. The only way this is good is if you're able to manage your combo points well. If you do not have the ability to kind of constantly be seeing if you're going to generate 3 combo points on a basic, then you're going to lose a lot of value out of this. And you also have to make sure you're spending with 3 combo points consistently. But with a hit and run strategy, you can oftentimes just one-shot elites with a full channeled up combo point, Twisting Blades, which is really, really nice. Then we have some of the jewelry here. which are some more offensive aspects. First off, we have the aspect of bursting venoms. Critical strikes with poison imbued skills have a 10% chance to create a toxic pool. While standing in that pool, poison imbued has no cooldown and no charge limit. Now this, I've heard some people talk about how, oh, well, that kind of seems a little bit mediocre because you have to crit strike with a poison imbued skill. You have to lucky hit. And even if you do all that, you have a 10% chance to create a pool. That is all true. However, we've already established the lucky hit is going to be pretty consistent. Critically striking is going to be pretty consistent because we have that increased crit strike chance with precision imbuement and a lot of other options. But mainly, this is not for clearing dungeons like the standard trash. It's for killing bosses and for those really heavy hitter bosses, especially the world bosses. What you'll notice with this is that when you actually proc this, you can basically infinitely proc it because you now have permanent poison imbuement. So you can chain it together again and again and again. So as soon as you get that first one, it's really, really powerful. And this nukes bosses super hard. So something that I would definitely recommend trying to get. Aspect of imitated imbuement. This makes our shadow clones mimic our imbuements. And when we cast an imbuement skill, we're going to get our active shadow clone increased damage. Again, with the way Twisting Blade's reducing our cooldowns, we can permanently increase our shadow clone damage. And then we're copying our imbuements, which is going to work with our traits and all that good stuff. It's so good, especially with aspect of bursting venom. If you get these two rolling, it's just disgusting. Aspect of corruption here. Imbuement skills have increased potency against vulnerable enemies. Guess what? This combos with this and this. And of course, we're always going to have the bosses vulnerable and everyone vulnerable for the most part. As for defensive aspects and utility aspects here, let's start off with the sort of more utility ones here. But first off, we have Ravager's aspect. Shadow Step has an additional charge. And if we kill someone with Shadow Step, we're going to refund a charge and increase the damage by Shadow Step. Really, we're using this for additional Shadow Step charge. That's basically why. Grasp of Shadow is another unique here. Lucky hit after we damage a vulnerable enemy with a marksman or cutthroat skill, we have a chance to summon a Shadow Clone. Guess what? The Shadow Clone can mimic the poison imbuement, which again kind of works with this over here. Again, you do not need Grasp of Shadow. In fact, you can run a couple of other options, like for example, Accelerating Aspect got a buff, so getting you extra attack speed here can be very, very nice. Heck, you can even run something like Inner Calm is actually not bad because you will stand in place with your inner sight oftentimes. You have a lot of different options, okay? On top of the Grasp of Shadow, we have three other aspects to go over. First off, the Codex of Power ones, Aspect of Disobedience and Aspect of Might. Aspect of Disobedience is just going to massively increase our armor, which is going to increase our damage reduction. And guess what? Aspect of Might is going to give us extra damage reduction as well. These two aspects together are going to make any build way tankier. So very, very important you run these, and they're both in the Codex of Power. Lastly, we have Harlequin Crest. We get extra damage reduction and gain ranks to all skills. Obviously, this is the one that so many people want. Extra damage reduction is massive, and extra ranks to all your skills is a huge damage bonus as well. Arguably one of the biggest damage bonuses you could possibly acquire. But it's going to be very rare to find. You do not need this one. Once again, you can run a lot of different other options. Another one that's really, really good, where is it, is the one that buffs up your Dark Shroud here. And I seem to be cannot find it here, but there is one that is going to buff up your Dark Shroud, which can be very, very powerful here. And I'm trying to find it here, but can't really see if I am. There we go. Enshrouding Aspect. We're going to gain a free Dark Shroud shadow every 3 seconds, and each Dark Shroud grants increased damage reduction. So if you can't find Harlequin Crest, it's totally fine to get this, which is also in the Codex of Power, which is going to amp up your Dark Shroud damage reduction. Had a trouble finding that. As for gems, real quickly here, weapon, we want the Amethyst, or if you happen to really amp up your crit strike, and later on it's going to be more valuable to get emeralds in there. Amethyst oftentimes for the earlier game, and then emerald for the later game. Crit strike's going to scale really, really well. Armor, you're going to want rubies for the maximum life, and then diamond for the resistance to all elements, but you can also run potentially the skull for additional armor, although with the aspect of disobedience, you get a percentage of that armor, and oftentimes you get to a point where it's diminishing returns. But if you don't have that point, then skull can be actually more useful due to the fact that it's increasing by a percentage of your armor, okay? So that's going to be gems, all your gear. Let's dive into the Paragon now. So this is an idealized version of the Paragon board. When you're acquiring glyphs in the game, it will take you a few hours to acquire every glyph. They're not super difficult to find, but there's a couple of important ones. Now, I could sit here and walk you through every single node, but I really want to focus on the boards that we're running, the legendary nodes that we decided to pick up, and the glyphs that we're running. So the first glyph here we're going to be focusing on is Closer. Now, we have as much dexterity as we possibly can in this initial starting board, and we're going to get extra cutthroat damage, but more importantly, the additional bonus is we're going to take 10% reduced damage while wielding a melee weapon. This is a really nice early starter if you can get this one, just to give you some extra damage reduction. It's not going to give you a ton of damage, right, because cutthroat skills damage increasing doesn't scale super well, but the extra melee damage reduction is going to be super massive. And of course, by the way, for our damage, our rare nodes, we have 10% damage and 100 armor on our base board. Next board we're going to be running is No Witnesses, and we're going to be picking up the Exploit glyph. This is a huge one, okay? This is such a good glyph. When an enemy is damaged by you, they're going to become vulnerable for 3 seconds. This cannot happen more than once every 20 seconds per enemy. Now, what this does is it helps you clear out regular trash much, much better. But we're using Puncture to keep it vulnerable on the bosses. And also, even if you do take a little bit longer, you're going to have vulnerable on that basic if you wish to have it as well. And of course, increased damage to vulnerable targets is extremely, extremely powerful. And that's why we're going to build up our strength in this area. We have training and knowledge. 10% damage is always going to be big, and the extra life is going to be nice as well. We're going to side enter into this area, this cluster, which gives us extra damage to healthy enemies and a little bit of extra crit strike damage, which is always super, super nice. Then we're going to go off to the left-hand side here and go into exploit weaknesses. Now, we're actually going to be picking up a legendary node in this case, but mainly that's because we have a lot of rare nodes that we actually want to pick up. Our glyph here, we're going to be running combat. For every 5 intelligence purchased within range, we're going to get extra crit strike damage in our core skills. And when we crit strike with our skills, we're going to get increased, or rather some energy back. So that's really, really powerful just throughout the game when we're running our combo points. But we're also gonna be able to pick up the dosage here, which extra potion healing, mainly picking this up just for some extra intelligence back here. And then we also have some vulnerable damage, which is the thing I'm most wanting out of this board, which is why we're gonna go up north for vulnerable damage here. And we're gonna go a little bit left to damage reduction from vulnerable enemies. This is just gonna give us a lot of damage reduction, lots of extra damage. And then because we're so close to this legendary node, we're gonna be picking this up because it's actually a good legendary node, especially against some of those tankier targets, because we're gonna get increased scaling damage against bosses. Okay, then we're going to pick up our next board, Tricks of the Trade, and this one's going to be extremely, extremely powerful for some extra damage, crit strike damage specifically, but also some damage to elites. As our rare glyph here, we have Tracker, which gives us extra increased damage to poison targets, and poison damage lasts 33% longer, which is going to be super, super massive. Okay, and of course we're picking up those rare nodes for crit strike damage, some extra physical damage. By the way, I believe this is 10% physical damage. I think this node is a little bit off from what I remember inside the game. We're also going to be picking up the legendary node. Now this board, the reason why we're running it is because of the legendary node, but also the crit strike damage. The reason why is because when we have a marksman skill, we're going to grant our next cutthroat skill 25% increased damage, and our cutthroat skill grant our marksman skills 25% increased damage. If we go back here to our year in skills here, what you'll notice is the condemnation says core skills deal increased damage when spending combo points. Your skill using this weapon have a 30% chance to generate 3 combo points. Guess what? I've seen it. It works with the Puncture, which is a marksman skill. So that's actually going to work with Tricks of the Trade here. You can see we're going to cast that marksman skill, which is our basic, then use our Twisting Blades, which is going to give us 25% increased damage, which is a massive, massive boon. Then we're going to go south here and pick up damage to close enemies and some damage reduction, and then go into Cunning Stratagem for the main reason that we can get some extra strength, and we're going to get extra damage reduction against close enemies, and we're going to be able to pick up core skill damage, some extra armor, and then we're going to go all the way down here to pick some extra damage nodes. So that's going to be the complete breakdown of the Paragon tree. Again, this is sort of the after the fact where you can put your glyphs where you want them to go to pick up all the nodes. Some of the ones that I would really, really hope that you get the bonuses for. Closer, to be honest, this glyph doesn't really do anything until you get the bonus, in my opinion, because you want that damage reduction. exploit, you really want this requirement as well, because you're going to get that vulnerable aspect. After that, all the other ones are also really good, but I think those two are probably the ones that I'd focus on the most outside of any other glyph in the game. And overall, this is going to be a pretty solid setup for you just to run immediately as you're starting out the game. Lastly, we have, or second to lastly, we have the specializations, and that is combo points and inner sight and preparation. Now, preparation can work interestingly with really powerful ultimates, and that can work, but Shadow Clone is really only necessary for bosses, and guess what? We kill the bosses with our Shadow Clone procced, so we don't really need preparation, okay? And on top of that, combo points are just super nice for the build, because when we get 3 combo points, you might think, oh, we're wasting time by generating combo points, but when we get the combo points and we spend them, we actually get a massive movement speed increase from Twisting Blades, which is going to be pretty big to help us move through the dungeons more quickly, so you actually make up your time by spending your combo points. Inner Sight is kind of awkward in regular kind of clearing, because it spawns in a random target, and it's going to be very difficult to charge up, because it randomly spawns after you kill that enemy. But against bosses is when we swap over. So when we get to the bosses, we're going to swap to Inner Sight, which you might have found in a multitude of my videos. And the reason for this is the Inner Sight only has one choice to be able to be placed, and that is it's going to be going on to the boss. And because of that, we will guarantee get infinite energy during those boss fights. And this is super powerful. It's also why we're running the little bit of energy regeneration on the ultimate cast, because we need that to kind of get enough energy to spam out our skills and get Inner Sight procced. Other than that, throughout most of the other content in the game, you don't really need a ton of energy. And in fact, I almost never run out with the builds that I've been running. I just basic a couple times, combo point, one shot, and that's totally fine. So I haven't had any issues with that whatsoever. But overall, that's going to be the specializations. Preparation, not worth it. Combo points for 90% of the content, and then Inner Sight for the last 10% when you're fighting bosses. Now, here we are at the last thing in this video, and that is stats. Now, I could sit here and talk about stats for hours, right? But I want to just talk about some of the more important ones that you're going to want to consider. The first two are crit strike chance and crit strike damage. This is just good on every single character for the most part. Honestly, crit strike is kind of like the thing you need to have a good end game build for the most part. And then we have vulnerable damage. This is very important, because again, this is our separate multiplier, and we have a lot of vulnerable damage coming in from our Paragon, which is going to amp this up even further. So amping it up even further and getting that permanent vulnerable damage is going to be really nice. After that, well, a lot of these kind of are just solid, right? Like damage with marksman's okay, or cutthroat's okay. Damage with core is okay. Damage versus poisoned is pretty solid. All of those are going to be pretty nice. As for like stats, getting extra skill levels, specifically on your gear pieces, on your gloves and your amulet, are the most important, because amulet can actually give you trait levels. So for example, you can get like exploit levels or malice levels, I've found, which are really powerful to amping up your damage. But also your gloves can get you extra ranks of twisting blades, which is going to be super nice. And of course, any other weapon that's going to give you like core skill upgrades or imbuement upgrades, all of that's going to be super solid as well. So just pay attention to that. Get your vulnerable damage increasing, which also means that you want to run a crossbow on your weapon, your ranged weapon. So if you have a bow that's an upgrade in terms of like damage per second, that does not matter. Ignore that. Only pick up crossbows that are upgrades, because that gives you vulnerable base stat damage, which is super massive, okay? Other than that, guys, that's going to be the complete rundown of the build. Again, this is kind of a introductory to the end game. You don't need any aspects in particular. You can easily run this. It's going to be very solid for anyone. And overall, you're just going to get a nice value build, and you're going to be able to run this as a leveling build. All the spreadsheet and the link to this build is going to be in the description down below. I was working on this the other day and it crashed and I lost my spreadsheet. I lost my build, so I had to remake it. So I apologize for it taking so long, but hopefully you enjoy. And if you did, consider leaving a like on the video, sub to the channel. And once again, I will be streaming in a couple hours as of posting this video. I'll leave a link to that in the description down below. If you guys want to check it out early, I'll be doing a Q&A before Diablo 4 launches. And then after that, game launches and we're playing, guys. We're blasting. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you all for the next one.